What if we had a 12-team playoff for the 2017 season of college football? Welcome back to the channel, guys. In this video, we're going to be going over a hypothetical playoff if it was expanded from 4 teams all the way to 12 and have the 6 automatic qualifiers and the 6 at-large bids for the 2017 season. So, first off, we're going to go over how the original 4-team playoff was. Here, Clemson was number 1, Oklahoma was number 2, Georgia was number 3, and of course, Alabama, the at-large, did not even appear in their conference championship game, was number 4, over Ohio State and Wisconsin at 5 and 6, respectively. Clemson beat Miami in the ACC championship, Oklahoma beat TCU in the Big 12, Georgia beat Auburn in the SEC championship, Ohio State beat previously undefeated Wisconsin in the Big 10, and USC beat Stanford in the Pac-12. Those are your 5 Power 5 champions, and obviously the big controversy was one-loss Alabama still getting in over a conference champ, but 2-loss Ohio State in the final rankings. So how would it be if a 12 team was actually in place for the 2017 season? Well, let's go over the rankings, and then we'll go over who I think would win in this scenario. First off, we're going to start with the number 1 overall seed, Clemson. 12-1, as I previously said before, they beat Miami. They beat them pretty soundly in the AC championship. I think it was 38-3. They only had 1 loss to Syracuse on the road. I think Kelly Bryant got hurt in that game, but that was their only blemish the whole season. They deserve to be the number 1 spot. Oklahoma was number 2. Like I said, beat TCU in the Big 12 championship. Beat them second time in the regular season. Only loss was to Iowa State at home. Lost by 3. But they rebounded in the middle of the season, and they finished off 12-1, just like Clemson did, to get into the 14 college football playoff. The 3 seed would be Georgia. They only loss was to Auburn in the middle of the season, when Auburn was actually, I think they were number 2 in the second to last CFP rankings. Even though they were 10-2, they had wins over Georgia and Alabama, 2 teams that were ranked in the top 3 most of the season. But then Georgia beat them 28-7 in the SEC championship game, and they got in to 12-1. They got in the CFP playoffs, as they are right here at the 3 seeded. And finally, the 4 seed, the 4th conference champion that would have got in this scenario would have been Ohio State. 11-2, they beat Wisconsin, who was previously 12-0, and in the number 4 slot going into the final week of the season in the Big 10 championship game. They are the 4th highest ranked conference champion, and they get the 4 seed, the first round bye. Those are the top 4 seeds. Each get a bye. Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, Ohio State. Not much difference besides the 4 seed, obviously, where Alabama previously was the 4, but they would get moved to 5 as the highest ranked team, at-large team, to get in this playoff at 11-1 and number 5. There's no surprise there. They were talented-wise, they were one of the best teams. They just had that late season loss to Auburn by a couple touchdowns. But the rest of the season, they kind of dominated everybody and had one of the better defenses in all of college football. Number 6 would have been the Big 10 loser, Wisconsin. They're 12-0, like I said, number 4 heading in to the Big 10 championship game. Kind of a weaker strength of schedule playing in the Big 10 West, but they still won every game they needed to. Just lost to Ohio State by 6 in the Big 10 championship game. That dropped them ultimately out of any contention to appear in the playoff. But they get the 6th seed, get a home game in the first round against the 11th seed. We'll get to that team they play in a second. Number 7 seed would be the Auburn Tigers. We're number 2 heading into the last week of the season in the SEC championship game. Then they got lost to Georgia 28-7, dropped from 2 all the way to 7 out of the playoff, 4-team playoff. But in this scenario, they would still get a home playoff game in Jordan-Hare in the first round against the 10th seed in this hypothetical scenario. Finally, the last team to get a home playoff game would be the Pac-12 champ USC Trojans. 11-2, they beat Stanford. The second time they beat Stanford in the Pac-12 championship game and in the regular season. Sam Darnold led this team to 11 wins for the 2nd consecutive season in a row. They would have gotten the last of the 5 Power 5 champions to get in, and they would get a home playoff game in the first round. And their opponent, the 9th seed, would be 10-2 Penn State, a team that was one of the better teams the entire season, and they lost twice to Michigan State and Ohio State by a combined 4 points. They choked against Ohio State in the 4th quarter, lost by 1, and then with a 3-hour rain delay, the very next week of the season in East Lansing at Michigan State, they lost on a last-second field goal, 27-24, to drop them to 2 straight losses, and they never really recovered because the only other good win they had was against Iowa. They beat Michigan as well, but Michigan wasn't that good in the final rankings. Penn State still gets a 9 seed. They're one of the best teams in this division, in this league, in the country, and they just get a nine slot, go on the road to face Southern Cal in the first round. Auburn will face UCF, the American champion, conference champion, the last of the conference champions in this 12-team playoff, 12-0 in that defeated Memphis in that epic American championship game, 62-55, double overtime. They were the only undefeated team in the entire country this entire season. They're well deserved to get into this playoff, not only as the Group of 5 champ, but not even as the last team in. They're deserving a top 10 slot, only undefeated team, and they will go to Jordan-Hare to face Auburn in the first round. The 11th seed who Wisconsin will face will be the Miami Hurricanes, who lost to Clemson by 35 points in the ACC championship game. Started off 10-0, got to number 2 in the CFP rankings, and then just kind of imploded since then. They lost to Pittsburgh, which is a very, very big upset in terms of how good Miami was doing, especially with that big win over Notre Dame. And then they just laid an egg against Clemson in the ACC championship game. Fell out of contention for the CFP and fell almost out of this 12-team playoff, but they did enough the first 10 games to deserve a spot in the 11th seed. They go to Madison, face Wisconsin in the first round. Finally, the last team in the playoff is Pac-12, one of the Pac-12 teams, Washington. At 10-2, Alabama faces them. Washington will have to go to Tuscaloosa to face Alabama, one of the toughest teams in the country. That'll be a interesting matchup for that 5-12 since it's not a Group of 5 automatic qualifier. So that is your 12-team playoff scenario and the layout of how all 12 teams would be. Obviously, like I said before, Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, Ohio State, 4 highest conference champs. They get the first round bye. USC, Auburn, Wisconsin, and Alabama will all host in the first round of this 12-team tournament. Now, who would win the playoff if the seedings and the standings and the bracket was exactly like this? I'm going to go over what you guys what I think, and we'll start with the first game and Southern Cal against Penn State. I think Penn State is a much better team than USC. I think USC was floundering. They were kind of an overrated team most of the season. They're kind of in contention for that playoff spot. There was the 4 teams playoff spot, but there's actually no possibility they would get in, especially over Alabama or Ohio State with that same record. Penn State was, like I said, had 2 losses by a combined 4 points, and they're seconds away from being undefeated and possibly one of the top 4, and not even top 2 teams in the entire country. But those 2 losses really doomed them in, but they're still one of the most talented teams. They get the win over USC in the first round on the road in Southern Cal. Now, Alabama would easily dispose of Washington, I feel. 12-1. They would move to 12-1. Washington would drop to 10-3. I don't even know how I could really analyze this. Alabama was just a better team. Washington was one of the mid Pac-12 teams that didn't get in the Pac-12 championship game because they lost to Southern Cal. Alabama easily disposes of the Huskies. They move on to the quarterfinals to the Cotton Bowl to face Ohio State. Other side, Auburn, UCF. UCF, I think it would be a repeat of what happened in real life. I think UCF was a team of destiny. I think they really had it going for them. They're one of the better Group of 5 teams we've seen in the entire CFP chase. So this team, especially being undefeated, being that underdog mentality, not getting the credit they deserve, the only undefeated team in the country, they defeat Auburn, who was a little down after that SEC championship game blowout loss to Georgia. I think they would pull the upset. In real life, they did already, and this one they will as well. They'll move on to the Peach Bowl to face number 2 seed Oklahoma. Finally, last of the first round, Wisconsin taking on Miami at home. I think Wisconsin, once again, just like in real life, these two played in the Orange Bowl. I think they would dispose of Miami. I think Wisconsin moved to 13-1. They would easily get that win in December in Madison. Snow, the weather, no ground and pound, very time possession ball. I don't think Miami would even be within 2 scores of this. I think Miami was just, they were down and they just had all the bad luck. Everything was going bad for them, and they were not going to rebound. Wisconsin's a good team. They really good defense, lackluster offense, but that they play complementary football. And I think they would just ground and pound in Miami until they won by at least 2 scores to advance to the quarterfinals to face Georgia in the Orange Bowl. Moving on to the quarterfinals, back to see how the matchup is. The Fiesta Bowl, Clemson taking on Penn State. Again, I think Penn State was one of the more talented teams in the entire country. Clemson had the best resume going into the CFP. Who would win this? I think we see a big upset. I think Penn State defeats Clemson, moves on to the semifinals. I think Barkley, McSorley, Gesicki That defense, that offense was just stacked. They had so many players on that offense. They had another few pros on that defense. And I think Clemson, as we saw in the actual CFP semifinal, yeah, they played a great Alabama defense, but they can only muster up 6 points. That team was kind of one of the more overrated teams we saw on the field. Resume-wise, it spoke for themselves. They were one of the best teams. On the field, the eye test, though, Penn State was just a better team, I think. And I think they would beat Clemson head-to-head and advance to the semifinals, where they would face the winner of Alabama-Ohio State from the Cotton Bowl. That would be Alabama. Once again, they would advance to the semifinals, be one of the Final Four teams in 2017. Ohio State had a good team that year with JT Barrett, came back and beat Penn State in Columbus, but that loss against Iowa the very next week was absolutely devastating to them and their whole arc of their season, and what happened with them and how it derailed everything. Any of the hopes they had of being in the CFP was absolutely disposed of when they had that second loss to Iowa, 55-24. I do believe the final score was. The other loss was to Oklahoma in Columbus. So this Ohio State team was good, but this Alabama team was just that much better. Even though Alabama overall played not a top 10 strength of schedule, but their defense was just suffocating, and I think they would suffocate Ohio State. They would hold them to probably less than 21 points, if not, under 15. And I think they would it'd be almost similar to what they did to Clemson in real life in that CFP semifinal. And I think Alabama would move on to the semifinal to face Penn State in the Sugar Bowl. Going to the other side, the Peach Bowl, Oklahoma taking on UCF. Baker Mayfield, the Heisman winner, Marquise Brown, that high-scoring, prolific offense, taking on the underdog mentality with the Griffin brothers at UCF, Scott Frost. I think UCF pulls the upset here. I think UCF is, again, a team that just has that underdog mentality. They would beat this Oklahoma team. I think Oklahoma would be repeat of the Rose Bowl against Georgia. They would get out to a decent lead. UCF would rebound, respond, and say, hey, look, it's us against the world. We're going to do whatever we take. We're going to be with each other. And I think UCF comes back and beats Oklahoma in the Peach Bowl to advance to the semifinal round, where they face the winner of the final quarterfinal game, Wisconsin, Georgia. I don't think this one should be any surprise. Georgia definitely would beat Wisconsin. Georgia just had a better team, better backfield, better receivers, and much better defense. Not much better. They both had a really good defense. I think the offensive backfield would be the deciding factor here. Wisconsin has a great offensive line. They've always had a great offensive line, but the two running backs, two-headed monster and Chubb and Michelle for Georgia would just be too much. And they would use Wisconsin's own prototypical style of play against them and just ground and pound. I think it would be like a 34-21 kind of game where Georgia would just pull away, just keep pounding, and Wisconsin's defense would bend too many times and they'd break too many times, and Georgia would advance to the semifinals in the Rose Bowl against UCF. So, semifinals. Only one of the 4 teams with the first round bye would move on in this scenario. 9-seed Penn State, 5-seed Alabama, and 10-seed UCF all come from the first round to get to the semifinals, win 2 games, and that's how the semifinals will shape up. So, first semifinal, Penn State against Alabama. This one was very difficult to choose, in my opinion, because again, Alabama was the national champ in real life in this scenario, but Penn State had one of the most talented teams they've had in the history of their program, and I think 2 to 3 plays away, this team was from being undefeated. They just had that much talent. They just got unlucky in those scenarios. And in reality, if I really think so, this is not me being a Big Ten homer, I do believe Penn State would pull the upset over Alabama. I think this team was so good. The 2016 Penn State version of that team was more lucky than just talented. They got so many breaks. They would just throw deep balls after deep ball, and people would come up with it. And that eventually led to their downfall when they had a pick in the Rose Bowl in 2016. This team was more mature, another year mature. Everybody came back on offense, and they had it going. They were so talented, and I think they would beat this Alabama team. It would be a really close game going back and forth. But I think Penn State would win, and they would advance to the national championship in this scenario. That's a very big upset to me, and I think it upset to everybody else, but I think they have the talent and the team to do it. UCF versus Georgia in the other semifinal game in the Rose Bowl. Georgia was so good. Obviously, they beat Wisconsin in the first round, or the quarterfinals. UCF upsetting Auburn and Oklahoma en route to the semifinal game. Do they have it in them to have one more upset to advance to the national championship game? No, they do not. Georgia should have won the actual title in 2017. There's no way you can argue with me that this team was one of the most talented teams they had prior to their mini run here the last few years in 21 through 23. This 2017 Georgia team was so stacked, so loaded at every position. There's no way UCF would have won 3 in a row, especially over the talented teams that were in this field. They would not beat Georgia. And Georgia advances to the national championship game to face Penn State, the 9 seed. The 9 seed coming all the way, beating the 8 seed, the 1 seed, and the 5 seed. One of those being Alabama, to face Georgia, who beat Wisconsin and UCF to get to their first national championship game in many, many, many years. So, I think the hypothetical spread of this, Penn State versus Georgia in 2017, Georgia would be at least a 7.5 point favorite, I think, and most Vegas odds would have predicted. And who do I think would win the national championship for this? I think it would be Georgia. We have a new champion finally. First 3 years of this, I think there was the same champion. But this year, Georgia gets it done, beats Penn State, gets their first national championship since 1980. Sony Michel, Nick Chubb lead them all the way. I think Barkley would have a huge game. So would McSorley and Gesicki. This would be a nice shootout. But ultimately, I think Georgia's offense would have prevailed and their defense would have held Penn State in check enough to get the job done and be the 2017 hypothetical 12-team playoff national champion. What do you guys think of this video? Do you think Georgia would have won it in the 12-team scenario? Who do you think should have been in it that was left out? Who do you think would have been national champion, period? Do you think it's totally wrong? Let me know in the comments below. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. Join me next time for the next one. We're going to go to 2018 version of this, and we'll see who wins that hypothetical 12-team playoff. Until then, guys, have a good one. See you then.